was a really fascinating thing. I don't know whether you saw it on David Suzuki.
No, I didn't. I heard somebody tell me about it, but I didn't see it. Did you see it?
Yes, and one of the things that was like it was kind of they were talking about the wild bees, some of them, and showing how this swarm had gone into a tree, and how they used propolis to try to make the entrance as small as it could, and
Okay.
then the wasps were coming and attacking it, and
Mm-hmm.
how the bees formed a wall to keep them from going into that hole in the tree. It was fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's those bees have to be constantly vigilant for those yellow jackets.
Yeah.
They're at their entrances continuously during the daytime.
Hoping, I'm not one for an early winter, but the first good hard frost usually takes care of most of those problems. But they're getting desperate, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I'm surprised there are still some around after.
yeah. Because we had frost, so I thought, based on what people said, I wouldn't see yellow jackets anymore. But oh my word, they're definitely still there, and they're definitely still attempting to crawl into my beehives.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, so Rheal has joined us, which is really, really great because he's our presenter for this evening. So there's always a little bit of a sigh of relief when you don't have to scramble. And we'll give it a few more minutes. We still have 6 or so minutes to go. Some of you may notice that there was an absence of a novice meeting this month. That wasn't intentional. I intend on having it maybe even as soon as tomorrow. The problem is with Thanksgiving, that kind of threw everyone's schedule and availability away. So I will be sending out invites for that. So sometime this week you'll see it. I'm just trying to squeeze it in with all of my fall prep. Did everyone receive the newsletter?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, that's always a good thing too, because we were having some issues converting it to a PDF format. So I'm glad everyone got it relatively early. I've also invited a couple of other beekeepers from that aren't members, just as an open invite to come and check us out. So I'm not going to be able to scroll and find them when they show up, but always appreciating if we can get people to come and join us just as guests. The general rule I always do is, if you know someone that's interested in beekeeping, or you know someone that's interested in joining the Red River, just invite them to a webinar, forward them their email address, and we'll give them a couple of newsletters. Let them kind of take us for a spin to see if we're a good fit. But we always encourage inviting guests, and as members, you can invite guests as well to see, the more members we have, the more new members we have, the new fresh eyes and fresh ideas. So always appreciate, well, more the merrier, right? So don't be shy if you have family or friends or know beekeepers that have heard about us but aren't necessarily, haven't really dipped their toe in the pool. The one wonderful thing about COVID too is, because this is a webinar, there are lots of opportunities for new members from northern Manitoba, for instance, who wouldn't be willing to take a couple of hour drive in. So looking forward to maybe getting us some more exposure and more members as well. So we're looking at about 24 members so far.
We're a little early yet because you
Yeah.
said 7:30, right?
Yeah, we've got a few more minutes, so I'm not going to rush things. So
Yeah.
has everyone got their bees where they want to put them for the winter? Not the inside guys, of course, but they've been moving bees on pallets and doing those little final touches, and it's reminding me how old my back is. So I've got a couple of students who decided to go with doubles, which is a really good idea, especially when you're just starting out, until you realize they can be up to 150 pounds come the fall. And then all of a sudden it's not as much fun as you thought. So,
Yes.
but pros and cons and give and take. So there's that. I'm just gonna figure out when my video isn't. There we go.
That's why I like 6-frame nukes. As I get older, maybe even they will get too heavy, but right now they're pretty comfortable. As I move some singles and I realize they're definitely heavier than a 6-framer.
Oh, absolutely.
Doable, but
Rheal, how do you winter inside, right?
yeah, that's the huge advantage.
Yeah. Yeah. Then you can do those 6-frame nukes quite easily. I don't know, is anybody doing them outside?
Some people are doing nukes outside, but I don't know what they qualify as a nuke though. It might be high they just started. It might still be in a standard box, but they started it this year, so they're still calling it a nuke.
Okay.
But this industry could do a lot to try to help define what a nuke is.
Mm-hmm.
We might need more qualifier nuke, 12-frame nuke, 6-frame nuke, 10-frame. We might need to put a lot more qualifiers on there. Because I got some nukes that they're 12 frame. They're double nukes.
Yeah.
And they're a standard box basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
May not be a bad idea to set up a committee to do a glossary of terms for beekeeping in Manitoba.
Even if it comes to selling, people sell nukes, but they're all over the map when they sell a nuke too. Does that guarantee them 3 frames of brood? Does that guarantee them 3 frames? It would be nice to have a little bit more of a definition or a glossary that you can point at.
Mm-hmm.
Well, knowing beekeepers, we'd probably hash it out for 5-6 years to determine the standard nuke size. But yeah, it's everyone's got their own methods or their own terminology.
Yeah.
Okay, 30 participants. We're looking at 7:30. I'm going to give it 2 more minutes, you guys, and then we'll get the show rolling. Again, just need to announce that I actually set this meeting up on the wrong account. So we are going to get booted and then I would like everyone to run to your inbox and you will see a fresh invite and we will continue on. My apologies. I noticed it right when I sent out the invites, and turning around and sending a proper invite is just going to cause more confusion to the situation. So here we are one more time, but it worked really well last time, so I have the greatest of expectations. Also, for those that are new on Zoom, take a minute to familiarize yourself with some of the bottom bar. If you drag your cursor down to the bottom bar, you'll see, for instance, there's the chat icon, and you can put questions in there. We will get to them as soon as we possibly can when we get to that section of the meeting. And also, if you have a broad question that you just want to answer the group, there will be people that can type in answers there at will. We still have people coming in, so we're just going to give it a few more minutes. Other than that, I hope you guys all had a safe, COVID-friendly Thanksgiving. I know it was pretty muted around our place, as we usually have about 20 people get together, and this year it was 4. But you know, it's very much a safety first thing. But hopefully things will be a little bit better come Christmas. But again, I would rather miss a couple of Thanksgivings than miss them all. So still have to keep it as safe as we possibly can. As for physical meetings with the Red River Apiarist Association, we will be playing that by ear, month to month. Probably can anticipate our last meeting of 2020 being virtual as well for November. And then we will be reevaluating it for the 1st of January. There will be a couple of things different, of course, being January is our standard election for executives, forming up an election committee and polling is the membership is probably going to be virtual and or just through email. And we will just continue to adapt to do our business as usual and keep things relatively painless and carry on from there. I do want to start milking the idea to all the members, the ones present, to consider, hey, want to join the executive? It's lots of fun on this side. You get to host meetings and teach classes and volunteer some time. So
John, you're breaking up. I didn't hear that.
Oh, come on. Just ink the contract, Brad. You know you want to be here. So okay, I am going to keep inviting members as they come in. We're getting to about 7:35 and we don't want to run short. Again, keep in mind that if we get bumped off Zoom, please open up your email inbox. I will have fresh invites to you in minutes, and we will just have a short little break and we will get back onto it. So without further ado, I want to thank everyone for attending the October 2020 Red River Apiarist Association virtual webinar meeting. Thanks again for everyone that was able to spare the evening to join us. Our speaker this evening will be our provincial apiarist, Rheal, who will be talking about late winter prep. One question that we are fielding a lot this year is to queen or to requeen for fall. And we'll kind of let him get into that into detail when we do our presentation. To start off the evening, if anyone did not receive a newsletter, we did have a couple of members who did not receive it, even though they were on the mail out list. We did have some issues with attachments, so that may have been the culprit. But if you did not get an October newsletter, please send me an email as listed, and we'll make sure that gets rectified right away. We'll also have it in the Dropbox for you to download. As well, this meeting is being recorded. If anyone has issues about that, then you, bail, because we're doing this recording for posterity, so that the people that weren't able to attend us with us this evening can download it off of our Dropbox as well. So we'll clear off the order of business. So I am looking, John Spear, I'm going to unmute you, or if I ask you to unmute yourself, if we could get a quick financial report.
Okay, so as of today, the balance in our checking account is $6,688.94. The only payments that are upcoming is just been submitted by Marlies. The newsletter costs since January through October, so that's just under $500. So that'll be going out. Other than that, there isn't anything else outstanding right now. Some members renewed since the last meeting, although technically nobody needs to renew actually till January, but however, that's fine. Other than that, I don't think there's anything else I need to mention.
Yeah, I don't think there's any other larger outstanding expenses coming up. So that leaves us in good standing. I know we have spent some money with the Zoom accounts, the upgrades, although we are saving a fair amount of money every month on not paying physical rent for the meeting rooms. So it seems to be balancing out. So very glad to hear that. We did get a little stiff with the membership list where we were sort of giving some leeway for late payments and everything else. That has been cleaned and groomed. So if you didn't get a Zoom invite, you're not here. And the reason why is because you didn't pony up your fees. So hopefully we'll do some reclaiming as well. If anyone is experiencing issues with shaky video or shaky audio, try turning your video off. It pushes the bandwidth onto your audio, and at least you'll be able to hear the rest of the meeting and the presentations. I'm going to call on Marg Smith to give a quick MBA report, even though one was published. Can you just do a recap for us, Marg?
Oh my goodness. A recap. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to assume that people have read it, and I'm going to say, are there any questions?
If anyone just puts their hand up, if there's a question, just type it in chat. We can always get back to it too as well. I want to thank you, Marg, for supplying, and Rheal as well, for supplying all of that information from the University of Manitoba on the research, the upcoming and the ongoing research. That's quite exciting, and it's really, really good to see some really interesting projects in there as well. So thanks for passing that along down the pipe. For approval of the minutes, we're still getting some people coming in. If any, we'll do it this way. The minutes were published in the last BCause, if everyone had a chance to read them. If there was any mistakes, any omissions, or any corrections that need to be made, can someone like to step up and point those out so that we can get them duly recorded?
I don't know how to make it louder.
We'll have to do this sooner next time.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There we go. If there are no objections to the minutes, can I get a motion from the floor to approve them?
I believe Stephen Bowen did.
Stephen Bowen, so can I get someone to second it? You can just type it in chat or just unmute yourself. Hold on, I do have a hand. Waldemar, your hand is up. You have to.
Yeah, and that as well, John, if you need it.
Yeah, Waldemar, you have to unmute yourself. For some reason, it's not doing that. Well, if you cut in, just let us know what's on your mind. Okay, we'll consider the member. We'll consider the minutes.
Who said, John? Who seconded it?
Jim Campbell seconded the.
Okay, thank you.
Everyone, I don't know, raise your hand if you approve, or wave to the screen if you approve, and we'll consider. Everyone's waving as I'm scrolling through, so we'll consider that approved unless we have any other objections. All right, so minutes are approved. Is there any issues from the floor that anyone would like to discuss before we start on with our presentation? Not at all. Okay, then I will pass this over to Rheal. Rheal Lafrenier is our provincial apiarist. He's done presentations for the Red River Apiarist Association many times on many topics. Always welcome and always appreciated. Here to talk to us today about fall management and winter preparation to requeen or not to requeen, that is the question. I will hand the floor over to Rheal Lafrenier. Rheal?
You're allowing my screen to be viewed, or?
Yeah, it's coming up to me as fully viewed.
Okay.
Can everyone else see Rheal?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but is my presentation showing?
No.
No.
Let's,
You have to hand over hosting to me, or how does that work?
that could be done. Just give me 1 second there. Sorry, I just have to find it.
And listed as R. Lafrenier.
Your face does come up, Rheal, every time you talk. So
But-
whenever you talk, you're on screen to everybody.
Yeah, it's the sharing of it. I'm actually not finding you in the hold on. Oh, there we are. Okay, I'm going to pass over host controls to you, Rheal, and there we are. And that should do it.
He's still muted.
Okay. Oh, there we are. That's excellent.
John, he's still muted.
Yeah. 1 second. I'm just trying to find him.
Am I unmuted now?
There you
Yes.
are. Perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
Good to go.
Okay.
All right.
So thanks again for the invite. Yeah, we're going to be talking a little about fall management and winter prep. And I got the question about requeening. Is it a good thing to requeen in the fall? And I guess my answer is depends. So let's get into some of these depends. Not the diapers, but the other kind of depends. There you go. So I've talked to this group before in the fall, and many times I've had an invite to talk about things that we do in the fall, and there's a lot of decision making that goes in the fall. Spring and fall are kind of the true decision making. Summer is actually just you run your playlist basically during the summer, but the real decisions are happening in the spring that actually give a bit of a prelude to what's going to happen in the fall. So fall is often you're just executing your spring plan, but you still have a lot of decision making. So I know that I've talked to this group about, when is it the right time to stop chasing honey and switch to fall preparation. And one of the hardest topics to cover in the fall is, when is you stop investing in a hive? When is it time to, either cull or do something with that hive, because on its own, it may no longer be a viable hive. So, and cull is a very, very difficult situation. It's not easy for beekeepers to make that decision to give up on a colony, but sometimes it truly is necessary. But the culling is often you're not depopulating the hive unless it has diseases you're just basically maybe reallocating the resources from that hive. But on its own, it probably will not survive the winter. And in many cases, that reallocation is a positive thing for maybe some of your other hives. But sometimes it may not necessarily be necessary to give up on that hive. And if you have the option of requeening, you may want to try to, I'm playing with the screen because I guess I'm letting people into the meeting here. You might have the opportunity to requeen, but in many cases, requeening is quite difficult in the fall for a lot of different situations. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Some of you may recognize this slide. I did a presentation for you guys this spring, and I talked about some of the building blocks for a honeybee colony viability. And we're going to be talking a lot about these situations, but more specifically, you know, the queen right, the genetic building block, because we're talking about whether you need to replace that colony with or reallocate its resources, or replace the queen if it's a failing queen or a deficient queen. So fall is a situation where a lot of these different building blocks will have more importance than others. And one that is very important is the population, you know, demographic. In order for a colony to survive the winter, it needs to have winter bees. And those winter bees are generally produced at the very tail end of the summer, but really into that September month is a really important month. And maybe even a little bit later than that is really important to getting bees that are going to survive the entire winter. So it's really important that you have, you know, the right demographic going into winter as well. The environmental conditions in this case are going to be that it's not only the conditions that the bees are experiencing right then and there when you're making decisions, it's what's going to happen in a couple weeks. And fall is the end of the season. So you have to do things that are going to guarantee the survival for several months. And the fall is also a really important time where you invest in the health of the bees. You have an opportunity to intervene if bees are unhealthy, and you may be able to medicate them or treat them to get them back into a condition that they can survive the winter. And nutrition is really important for bees going into that wintering period where they have to take in virtually all of their food supply in that fall to guarantee their survival for the following spring. And even though shelter is really important, that's one aspect of this building block. I'm not going to go into much detail other than talk a little bit about the slight differences in decision making if you're running a single as opposed to a double. I got so many things on my screen right now. Sorry about this. So I'm going to play out a whole bunch of scenarios, and we'll discuss, or I'll discuss those scenarios, and you think about how you would make those decisions if you were faced with this type of scenario. So this first scenario for requeening is, sorry, I'm letting people into the meeting, is based on the date where you're making these decisions is September 1, and you removed all of the honey supers, so the honey flow is over, you're not chasing honey, but you haven't started your mite control, and you also haven't started feeding yet. But as you're just getting starting with your mite control, you notice that you have one hive that's a drone layer. The hive itself still has lots of worker bees and lots of brood. Other than being a drone layer, it appears to be healthy. So that's your scenario. And the question is, what are your options? So the deficiency in your colony development blocks is that this is a drone layer. So you do not have a viable queen. The fact that it is a drone layer that still has lots of brood, worker brood in the hive, means that it likely start producing drones just very recently. So you are likely dealing with a drone laying queen. So in that scenario, if you are dealing with a drone laying queen, you could find that queen, you know, terminate her reign, so dispatch the queen. And if you're able to find a replacement queen, you could probably still requeen at that time. Finding queens in September 1 is quite difficult, but not necessarily impossible. So if you could find a queen, it is definitely possible to maintain this hive. And the reason why I say that that's on the table for consideration is that when you look at your other scenario, your population demographic, because there's still lots of brood in the hive on September 1, you know that you're not going to disrupt that demographic that much if you get a queen in there right away. So there's still a lot of young brood. So there's potential for these winter bees to go into winter. You still have a very large population. So there should be able to take down the feed quite nicely. You're just getting started with your mite control. So you haven't spent a lot of money on this, but you know that if you spend money on it, there's the chance that it'll survive. So it's still worthwhile spending the money to put mite control, as well as if you haven't started feeding, you haven't spent the money on that. So theoretically, if this is a drone laying queen, you could replace the queen. If you could not find a queen, it still is possible to salvage whatever you possibly can from that hive by reallocating the bees as well as the brood to other hives. The fact that in this scenario, all your other hives are already look healthy and are strong, they don't necessarily need these bees, then you can decide whether you spread the wealth, you spread the bees amongst, several hives, or if you're running a single, perhaps if you got rid of this queen, you got lots of brood, you might turn that single into a double if there's any advantage to that. So you have a lot of options here. You can requeen if you can get a queen. You could salvage the bees if you want to, because the risk is fairly low for disease because they look generally healthy, and you're going to start a mite control treatment that if they have mites, they're going to get knocked down. Should you cull these bees or brood? At this point, there's no indications that there's no value in these bees. So, and they're not a high risk for disease transmission. So culling probably wouldn't be on the table. So you can just reallocate. Sorry, I'm still letting people in. But doing nothing is really not an option. If this is a drone layer, she's going to keep on laying drones, and it's going to destroy your equipment. And it's probably not, it's not going to survive the winter. There's a very, very slim chance that a drone layer is going to survive the winter. So doing nothing is not an option. You have to do something. Okay. So that's that scenario. And if you got any questions, maybe we'll deal with them at the end. But if you have something that's a burning desire about this particular scenario, maybe unmute yourself and just quickly ask that question. Hearing none, I'll move to the next scenario. So this one had lots of options. I'm trying to advance, but it's not advancing. I think the hosting function, maybe I might have to turn off my video for myself because there you go.
There you go.
My internet's gotten really slow since I've been hosting. Okay. Sorry, is that John?
Go ahead. When we do the switch over, we'll get onto the pro account, which will fix that. And we'll also have more co-hosting options, so I'm not basically jumping out of the vehicle while you hurtle off the cliff. So apologies for the inconvenience, Rheal.
No, it's just when people want to get in, it just covers my screen, so I really can't even see it. Now I got to press a couple different buttons. So I apologize if this is a really choppy presentation. I got too many things happening and My OCD is going crazy right now.
You're doing well. Sorry for the wrecked stage. Go ahead.
So I'm going to play out another little scenario. It's very, very similar to the first scenario. So I just call it example B. So you're in the same time frame, very beginning of fall / end of summer. You've gotten the honey off this hive. You're dealing with a drone layer. And in the previous scenario, you had lots of bees and you had lots of brood. But in this scenario, you do not have a lot of brood. But otherwise, the hive looks healthy. So when you don't have a lot of brood and you're early September, you have to worry about when, if it became a drone layer, how long has it been a drone layer if you don't have any worker brood? The likely scenario in this situation, if you don't have a lot of worker brood, you might have a lot of drone brood in your hive, and that's just taking up valuable real estate if you wanted to try to keep this hive a viable hive. So you're going to have to replace that lost brood by stealing brood from other hives. So that's going to be the scenario. So if you were to try to find a queen to replace this, you would probably also have to go to your other healthy hives and steal some of their worker brood once you got rid of that drone laying queen. The other scenario that could happen here too is if you have a lot of drones occurring in your hive and your worker brood is non-existent, you could have the scenario of laying workers. So it might have went queenless a while back, and there may be laying workers that are generating these drones. Well, now you have not only one queen to deal with, you have all these little pseudo queens to deal with as well too. So in that case, throwing a queen at this situation with this population could be disastrous. So you would have to investigate very, very closely to determine whether you have laying workers or you have a drone laying queen. The fact that there are lots of workers in the hive in the fall makes it very, very hard to find queens. So unless you can find that queen and get rid of her, you might have to assume that you might have some laying workers because it's been queenless for quite a while. Under that scenario, it's a big question mark whether you should try to requeen that hive. You're much better off perhaps taking those bees if there's a value in those bees. If your other hives could benefit from a little boost in population, then you may want to salvage these bees. It's probably not good if it's a laying worker to try to take all of these bees from this drone laying hive and put them into one of your hives. You're better off shaking some of these bees in front of your hives and allowing those workers to go into those hives that you shook the bees in front, so that they can get rid of any laying workers that are coming in. Before that, you should probably make sure that you have entrance reducers just to make sure that flow of bees into the hive is kind of controlled. So make sure you have entrance reducers. In terms of whether you need to call this, I don't think, again, it really justifies calling. You could probably salvage the bees at the very least. And unless you have a lot of drone comb, you might have to take some of that drone comb out and just cull some of your frames, but all the good equipment you can just maintain. And do nothing, same scenario. You can't do nothing with a drone laying hive, so you have to do something. So you either have to reallocate these bees, or you could cull it, but I don't think there's really necessary. And I probably wouldn't advise trying to replace the queen unless you're willing to sacrifice a lot of brood from your other hives. There you go. And example C is just more extreme than the previous two examples. Same timeline, same drone laying problem, but this time you don't have a lot of workers. you don't have any brood, and the bee population and the comb might not look healthy. So if you see some spotty brood left over, before you reallocate these bees, you need to investigate whether the depopulation or the problem that you're dealing with is more than just a drone layer, and whether it might be disease related. So in this case, there's probably not enough bees to want to throw a queen at, so that's not really a good option. To reallocate these bees, you have to investigate whether you might be dealing with other problems than just a drone layer. If you do reallocate, again, you might be dealing with laying workers, so it's better to shake the bees in front of the hives that you want to have these bees join their hive. Make sure you don't do that on cold ground. If it's September 1st, try to make that access into the hive easy for them, but also make sure the entrance reducers kind of controls the movement inside the hive. And again, doing nothing is not an option. But if you have a disease concern, this might be a hive that you just say it's not worth the risk, and you may just want to close it up and remove it from that yard site and deal with the population later on, and then you can scrutinize the equipment for any risk of disease. So if your other bees are healthy, sometimes it's not worth salvaging a couple bees. Your other hives are going to survive without them. So it may be that might be an option where culling this hive completely might be the right thing to do. Sorry, my internet is really slow. There we go. Okay, now this is a completely different scenario. So the other first scenario was a realistic one for the early part of what we call fall. Now you're the 20th of September. You're into fall. In this scenario, you're almost finished your mite control. So you've spent money on these hives already, and you're halfway towards finish feeding your bees. So you've started feeding them, and you're at least halfway. And you run into a situation where you find no brood in one of your hives. There's still lots of worker bees, but you can't find a queen anywhere. Other than the potential for this to be queenless, everything else looks healthy. So you're kind of not concerned that disease is a problem with these bees. So that if you wanted to reallocate them or keep this hive, you certainly could, because the general health of the bees is looking fairly good. But again, all your other hives are not desperate for these bees. So now you got to figure out what you're going to do. If you were to try to replace the queen at this time, the September 20th, I think it would be very hard to find a queen at that time. So I think replacing to requeen at September 20th is really a difficult thing to do. So it's probably not going to be an option for most people unless you raise your own queens and have some in a bank somewhere. You could potentially reallocate these bees, but you have to kind of worry about, are you actually reallocating these bees when there might be still a viable queen in the hive? September 20th is getting a little bit into the fall where brood production is going to be winding down very quickly. And you have some genetics that will shut down really, really quickly. So it might be that you actually still have a queen in this hive, and she's just shut down because you started feeding a hive and it just started packing up all the open cells with feed. And as that brood emerges, they're just shoving feed into all these open cells, and the hive is basically shut down brood production. So you're thinking that you're queenless when you might not be queenless. So unless you have some other symptoms of queenlessness, you may want to kind of really investigate whether this hive is queenless or not, or maybe just leave it go for a while to see if it does raise a little bit of brood a little bit later, or if you actually steal a frame of very young larvae from one of your other hives, put it into this hive, see if it tries to raise a queen. September 20th, it may not want to even try to raise a queen, so that might not be a very good test. But if it does try to raise a queen, then you know that it's probably queenless, and then you have to do something to salvage these bees. But if it doesn't try to raise a queen at all, one of the options would be to just leave it go. You've already spent your money on mite control. You've already spent, half the money you're going to spend to feed it. So you might just want to roll that dice and say, I know it doesn't have any brood right now, but maybe it's still queen right, and I'm going to let it go. And there's no justification for culling it at this point. Okay. So the example B on this scenario, same timeline. Again, you've basically finished your mite control. You're more than halfway finished feeding. There's still no brood in that hive, but in this case, there isn't a lot of worker bees. So, but you still can't find that queen. So it's understandable that you couldn't find the queen in the other one if there's tons and tons of worker bees, and maybe you're fairly new to beekeeping. It's quite hard. Even experienced beekeepers have a tough time finding queens in the fall without spending a whole pile of time looking for that queen. But if you don't have that many worker bees and you still can't find a queen, it's more than likely queenless in that case. So then that actually helps a little bit. To try to replace it, I think it's the same scenario. You're not going to find a queen, so that's really not an option. To reallocate those bees, that certainly is an option. If you really think that it's queenless, it's probably worthwhile shaking a small amount of bees into the other hives, as long as you feel confident that your scenario is correct and that the bees are generally healthy. You've already controlled the mites on them. They're low risk for some of these problems. So to reallocate these bees, it's probably definitely worthwhile. If you had one hive that was weak, it would be probably worthwhile to allocate all these bees to one hive, so you're not spreading that risk to all the other hives that don't necessarily need it. But if you just had a small amount of bees, you could probably spread them around with minimal loss. Doesn't seem like it's justifiable to cull it at this point. And to leave it alone, you could leave it alone, but if it's got a small population, the likelihood of it surviving winter is pretty low. And the fact that you really think that it's queenless because you couldn't find a queen with a small amount of bees, it wouldn't survive the winter. So you're much better off to reallocate these bees somewhere else. So this is my last scenario. It's the same kind of premise as the previous two, A, B, and C of scenario 2. You're September 20th. You got no brood in the hive. The hive has very few bees, worker bees. You can't find a queen, so you pretty well know it's queenless. But it also they don't look healthy. The hive does not look healthy. So in that scenario, we've already talked, replacing a queen is really not an option. Reallocating these, if you think that there might be a health issue with the bees, is really not something you should take lightly. You should scrutinize these bees before you start spreading around. So in this case, if you're not losing a lot of bees by depopulating this hive, your other hives are healthy without having to be boosted, culling these bees is certainly worthwhile. And depending on what your reasonings are for the unhealthy state of that colony, if you see spotty dead brood, you want to make sure that you don't reallocate any of the resources from this hive as well too, because in the previous scenario we talked about, you've already partially fed this hive. In addition to moving the bees into other hives, you could steal the food from this hive and spread it to your other hives if you weren't concerned about health. In this scenario, you do have a bit of a health concern. It certainly is not worth allocating those resources to other hives. You may just want to scrutinize them, a little bit more, submit some samples if you need to. And if they come back, not positive for certain diseases that you really have concerns over, like American foul brood or European foul brood, you could reallocate these resources next spring. You could use this feed that you put in this fall as feed for nukes that you're going to make next spring. So, but in this scenario, culling is probably your most likely option. So with that, I guess we haven't been kicked out, so I think we transferred over to the professional version of the software. So if there are any questions, I would definitely be more than happy to take questions. How do you want to do questions? Should I take my screen off so I can actually see questions? Or are you gonna? Do I turn it over to you again? Yeah.
If you could turn it over to me again, Rheal,
Okay.
then I can direct traffic, and then you don't have so much of a headache. Would be great. Just right click me.
Yep. I'll share screen.
And for everybody waiting in the lobby, my apologies. We have changed settings so that there will be no lobby because there isn't really a meeting to it. Anyone with an invite is more than happy to share it around.
Trying to find the participants here. Were you at the very beginning, or? Oh, that's not fine.
There we go.
What do I have to do from here?
Just right click my name. Or there might be a little, or it'll say mute, and then there'll be a little more tag that pops up.
Okay. And what? Make host. Okay, there you go. I think you're hosting
now. Waiting room. Ooh, we have. Okay. We've got a bunch of new people that were in the waiting room that are joining us now. My apologies for the technical difficulties. It was a settings thing. We are taping this entire presentation so that because you missed a massive chunk of it, you'll still be able to download and view it as well. Right now, we're going to take some questions. And Dave, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask a question for Rheal?
Hi, Rheal. Yep. I was just wondering with the example one B scenario, when you were talking about a lot of drone comb, would it make any sense to put some drone frames on the outside of some hives to attract the mites, or is that too late in the season for that?
Yeah, you could cull those frames, but if you have any use for them as drone traps, you could certainly use them later. But if there's a lot of drone comb in that particular hive, as a hive, it's not going to be viable. You have to remove some of that drone comb for sure. If you're
I was sort of using other hives to. Okay, thanks.
Especially if you didn't have a concern over health, because the general health of the bees looks good, it's just a drone laying issue, then you can move those frames into other. In the scenario C of that one, if you had a lot of drone comb from that one, but your bees did not look healthy, those would not be drone frames that you'd want to reallocate to other hives later on.
Thank you.
Rheal, one of the common denominators here is making sure when you're looking at the culling or shaking out bees is that making sure they're incredibly healthy, like making sure the queenlessness may not have been caused by disease. What kind of diseases would have you overlooked in the season if that was a factor in the queenlessness issue?
There probably wouldn't be a lot of queenlessness diseases. Nosema may cause that problem, so it may be something that you'd want to, if you had a concern whether the population was being affected by nosema, you may want to have a test before you reallocate those bees or salvage those bees from that hive. You could theoretically get a test in a couple of days if you can get the sample into the lab very quickly. So you wouldn't leave them in that drone laying condition for very long, if that was a concern. But in most cases, unless, if you had spotty brood or anything like that, that might be related to American foul brood or European foul brood, those would be the two diseases that I would be really concerned about sharing any bees from that hive. If there was high mite loads, it's not great to share high mite bees to other hives, but you haven't started your mite control yet. So theoretically, you would probably be able to control them if you did share them, but it might be worthwhile before you shared any of those bees, you did a mite wash on them too, just to know, what's the situation in these bees.
If you're looking at a requeening situation, and your colony's kind of set on a drone laying mode, any tricks or tips that you use to sort of reset them?
The one thing that's probably more has to do with the population. To requeen a very populated hive is sometimes very difficult. They don't accept the queens quite as readily as hives that are a little bit weaker. We've had that issue in the spring as well too, where some people have made really big nukes because they had lots of brood and they found that queen acceptance was way down. So in that scenario, if you had a drone laying queen, it may be worthwhile killing that queen, maybe leaving the hive queenless for a day or two, and then introducing a cage with a queen, but still slow releasing that queen. Because if you did it too quickly, just because there's so much population in there, there's still lots of brood. If there's lots of brood in there, all those pheromones are there, and it takes a while for them to kind of change that mode. So they might be still loyal to the old queen, or they will be, the foreign pheromones of the new queen may not be accepted. So slow release would be really important if you have a big population. If you've got laying workers, there's no requeening that hive. The only way you could salvage anything is shaking those bees out in front of other hives, or just shaking them out and letting them join other hives in the yard. So you may not be targeting one hive. You may be shaking them out in a kind of a neutral area and letting them join whatever hive they want to join. But again, you may want to make sure that those bees are healthy. So if you have any health concerns that you want to evaluate first, it would be worthwhile evaluating those before you did that.
Monica, when we were all gathered in, if I could just ask you to unmute, you were having some requeening challenges this fall. Can you just give those that weren't logged on at the time a bit of a update on how you went through that, and what made you decide to requeen, and did you regret that decision?
So, you know what, I decided not to requeen. I thought I had a queenless hive, and I, in a way, wished I had this talk before I did anything. I thought I had a hive that was very, very strong. There was no brood. There was no fresh eggs or larvae. So I assumed I was queenless. Now, I was looking at probably around that September 1st, like you were talking, Rheal. And so I decided it was a queenless hive, and I would reallocate those bees to other hives. And I did the, I only had 3 hives, so I reallocated to 2 different hives. And I did the paper thing, and I let them eat through the paper. And after a week or two, then I took that off. They joined up, and about 2 weeks ago, we had a really warm day one day, I think it was, and I decided I would like to go in there and I'd like to see my queens just to make sure I'm good for the winter. Because I'm not 100% novice, but I'm still a new beekeeper. So I go in and I start looking in the hives, and lo and behold, I find queens in both the hives, but the hive that was the weaker one where I put most of the relocation into, I did not find the queen I expected to find. I found the queen that would have been in the first hive that I thought didn't have a queen. The reason I knew it was that queen is because the queen in the hive that I was relocating things to, I sort of got overzealous with the marker, and she was marked really weird. So I knew what the queens looked like in the two different hives. They would look different, like the spots on them look different. And lo and behold, I did not find her in the hive I expected to find her, but I found the queen that I thought was missing from the first hive. And so if I had heard yours talk, Rheal, I probably should have left well enough alone for a little while, and then maybe she would have started laying and had some brood at some point, and I would have had 3 hives going into the winter. But as a result, I have 2 relatively strong hives, but I killed a queen that I needn't have killed.
Yeah. Well, genetics play into this big time too. Some hives will shut down really early. Big populations will do that as well too. They're looking to pack feed into that hive because they know their winter's coming. And as soon as brood cells become available, they're shoving nectar in there. So she's not laying,
Yeah. You know what? I wish I'd heard this talk, because I probably should have left it alone. They probably had, it was a really full hive. So they probably had just shut down by the early September time already.
September 1's a little bit early for shutting down. So I think you
I was probably about the 7th when I did this.
Yeah.
Like a weekend, it was after the long, like it was probably a weekend after the long weekend.
Is this a double or single?
I only do singles, so it's a single. So I should have probably did your scenario, do nothing and wait, right? And I didn't, but I still have 2 hives that are full of bees. So, but I could have had 3.
Or and if you can't tell if it's buzzy or anything like that, the other symptoms of a queenless hive, it's worthwhile stealing a frame of brood, very young brood from another hive, throwing it in there, and just see if they try to raise a queen.
Well, and I saw that in there, and that would have been a good thing to do too, to see if they would be making a queen cell. I should have tried that.
It's not a 100% guarantee. It's probably even a long shot, but it's worthwhile trying.
Yeah. Next year.
Thanks for sharing that, Monica.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a question in chat from Tim. How can one tell the type of queen that shuts down early? Now, there's obviously an advantage for beekeepers that have more than 2 or 4 colonies. Generally, and if you're making your own queens, you kind of know your genetics a little bit better. So the answer to that becomes quite apparent. This is pretty much an experience in taking notes answer, where if some people are quite loyal to the breeders that they get their stock from, some people breed their own queens, and they sort of take notes and keep track of what the queen behaviors are throughout the season, and shutting down laying early or late is an attribute you track, because if you've got a very late laying queen, they're also burning through a lot more resources than you may or may not want. As if you're talking about like breeds, there is a little bit of a difference between, let's say, Italians and Buckfast, for instance. But Rheal, can you weigh in on that? Is there a breed of queen that's a little bit more, I don't know, shut down early friendly than others?
Yeah, there's a lot of nothing's on the. It's not. It's all. Everything's on a scale. So even if you have some Italians, some of them will shut down a little bit later than others. So everything's on a scale. But Carniolans are quite notorious for shutting down, especially when the resources start to dry up a bit. They're very in tune into the environment, as they really monitor how food comes in, and they will shut down even when you have periods where pollen sources kind of dry up because of drought. They'll be shutting down in those situations a lot of time to try to preserve whatever resources are in the hive. So I would say Carnica are pretty good at shutting down. And like you mentioned, the Italians, they tend not to shut down. They're almost the extreme, the exact opposite. I kind of refer to Carniolan bees as hippie bees because they're really in tune into the environment. They're true environmentalists, where the Italian bee is easily manipulated. You give it food and it keeps on trucking.
This is from Tim again. Does the dry season we had affect many of the queens this season as for, I would assume, shutting down? And yeah, nectar
I think it's a perfect
availability.
scenario for that. Yeah.
Nectar availability is part of the timing. We have to always keep in mind that their goals are not necessarily always our goals, and they don't know what we know, and we definitely don't know what they know. So when they're behaving a certain way, discovering why they're doing that, or at least acknowledging that they're doing it for a specific reason, for their survivability is really, really important. So, and we've had weird abnormalities in the fall before. We had a pollen drought one year, which really affected overwintering mortality. This year, for instance, I haven't seen that. I was watching them pull in pollen a couple of days ago from what I'm not sure, but it was really, really good to see. It's always the sign of a healthy hive, and it's always, it feels like you've got a bit of an insurance policy in your pocket. Veronica fielded a question or made a statement where I experienced in mid-September a very slow acceptance of queen, and even a week after her release, they went and created a swarm queen cell, which I found, thankfully. It took me almost a week of slow release before I felt comfortable letting her out of the cage, and I found the swarm cell about 8 days later. That could have been also because they weren't really keen on the queen that you got. She may have had an imperfection that wasn't necessarily noticeable to the human eye. They could have just been absolutely cranky. With introducing queens, a student of mine and I were trying to get the temperament of 1 out of 3 of his colonies down this year. We requeened it twice. Once, they weren't having nothing of accepting the first one and trying all the tricks in the bag. Sometimes you will get a stubborn colony, and the slow release and being comfortable and making sure she doesn't get bald is paramount. There's many techniques to try to avoid that, but making sure she's safe is kind of paramount.
Yeah, one tip might be that if you have that situation, weaken that hive. Take out brood and take out bees. Weaken the condition of the hive, and generally the acceptance might go up.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's not a guarantee, but we know that populated hives are the hardest to requeen.
One of the questions I had texted in by one of my students was, when you're doing a cull, when you're looking at, let's say you've got a colony or a single that's got 5, 6 frames or 5.5 frames, and you're not confident that it's going to make it through the winter, and of course now time's run out. The suggestion was made to just double them up and just turn your singles into doubles. But because of the weather, killing one of the queens off wasn't very practical or possible. So it was floated by me to just basically let the queens fight it out and see what happens. Can you expand, Rheal, on the pitfalls of doing that and why that may not be the best choice? Or
Yeah,
maybe why it could be, in an emergency situation?
Yeah, just to kind of put a little bit of a prelude to that, if you are introducing 2 colonies together, if they're of similar strength, you have to realize that there probably will be more likely a battle is going to occur and may take longer for it to resolve. Whereas if you're putting a a weaker colony and uniting it to a slightly stronger colony, those battles tend to resolve fairly quickly, usually in the favor of the slightly stronger hive. So in that scenario, you may want to make sure that you maybe reduce that population a little bit, maybe share it amongst two hives, so that you're not adding as much population to that other hive right away. And you can always steal from the other one later on and boost it again once it's kind of been accepted. I know that's a lot of work, but for us hobbyists, we have more, we usually like doing some of that stuff. And as long as it's not too late in the season, you can get away with it. And there's a rule of thumb. When you're uniting bees or trying to get bees to kind of become one unit, the hive that you're introducing the bees to, you don't want to introduce more than 50% of the population that is in the hive that you want to add bees to. So if you've got 4 frames of brood and bees to cover all that, you should not add more than 2 frames to that hive, or else you run the risk of that population you just added there potentially damaging your original population and maybe even killing your queen. So if you added 3 frames and you had 4 frames to the hive that you want to add to, you are increasing your risk. And if you add equal amounts, 4 and 4, I think you're really, it's almost a crapshoot whether that's going to be successful or not.
Understandable. There's also a student who, despite tutelage, decided to take 2 weak singles, put them together, but put a queen excluder between them, thinking that they would winter all right. I told him that queen excluders are basically cold sinks, and he says, oh no, that's not a problem because it's a plastic one. In that scenario, I think that's not going to be very successful at all. Can you elaborate on exactly why that probably isn't going to work, Rheal?
I agree with you. It probably will not work. It's hard for the bees to cluster, especially if it's now a double and you've put a barrier between that cluster between the 2 boxes. The other, to kind of put that scenario, if you have a very weak colony, it's barely covering, half of a single, and you take another half single and you add them together, now you have a half double. You haven't really improved the chances of survival that much.
No.
You'd actually would be better off taking that half single and adding it to the half single directly by, maybe not adding all the bees at one time, maybe doing it in two events, and try to get them into that volume that is probably going to give them a better chance of winter survival. A half populated double has no better chance of surviving a winter than a half populated single.
Well said. We've been doing this for 1 hour and 25 minutes. I would like to take a short break, let people stretch their legs, grab a beverage, go to the bathroom. So this will be sort of our ad hoc coffee break. So it is 8:35 right now. If we could resume coming back in, let's say, 10 minutes. We're just going to put everything on pause, everybody. I'm going to pause the recording of the meeting, and we will see you back here at 8:45. If when you come back, the meeting's kicked us all out, again, run right to your email inbox, and there'll be a fresh invite waiting for you. So let's go grab a cup of coffee, and or if you'd like to stay and unmute yourselves and talk amongst yourselves, we will come back to questions and answers and some other business in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Not much. I'll have to go over it.
A lot of them are second, third year people.
I'm open to hearing how other people have dealt with yellow jackets. Because I've had lots of attacks on my house from yellow jackets this year. Anybody, what have you done?
You have entrance
Monica, can
with
you hear
on?
me? Monica, can you hear me?
I can, Veronica. Yes.
Yeah, I had lots of yellow jackets too, and all kinds of flying insects. But what I did was I closed the entrances down to the smallest opening, and that really seemed to settle things down.
But they're still
I
trying.
just put the entrance.
Like I have it down to this, but I have top and bottom, right? Like,
Yeah.
But oh my goodness, there's always they have to be on guard.
Yeah, the smaller the entrance, the easier it is for them to chase them out, and I don't think it's a whole lot of work if there's 5 bees in the entrance and 1 yellow jacket. They don't get in very far. I've been watching them. Well,
Yeah.
it's slowing down now that it's older, but I've been watching them, and they don't get in very far before they get kicked out again. So I don't think it's that big a deal. If you have the bottom entrance on the smallest opening,
Yeah.
and the top entrance, they just fill it up as need be.
Okay.
They seem to be able to. Yeah, but yeah, there were a lot of wasps.
A lot of wasps, and still, I thought the frost would take care of them, but they're still out there.
They're very
They're probably not preying on the bees that much. They're just trying to take advantage of a cheap meal. So they're looking for syrup
honey.
than anything else. So
Okay.
you're going to see them, but they're really not causing that much of an issue. The fact that you have such an abundance of bees, especially older bees, there's lots of guards. Yeah, we're very fortunate we don't deal with wasps like some other countries deal with wasps, where there's huge populations, multiple generations of like overlaps of years and years. They have a really big problem with wasps actually preying on the hives, and
Okay.
we all know about the murder hornets being
Yeah.
well too. But wasps at certain times of the year when they're high, when their demand for protein is really high, they could prey on bees. But right now they're in survival mode, so they're just looking for carbohydrate.
Okay.
They seem to eat mostly the dead stuff around the outside. The wasps. They do a really good job of cleaning up.
If you've got some wax and that you want to get the honey off of that wax, like your cat and stuff like that, you put them out there for your bees, and your bees will clean it up to a certain point. But then the wasps get in there, and that's when you get them working for you, and they'll do a much better job.
Yeah. I always do that with my cappings and my extracted frames. I put them out there, and everything gets cleaned within a day. It's just amazing how quickly it gets cleaned up.
Yeah, it's a block party. It's fun to watch.
Yeah. So it's a bit scary looking, actually, but it is fun to watch. It's amazing what they do.
Well, and everybody shows up, right?
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I love it.
Yeah. The ants, the bees, and the wasps, they all sort of go at it.
Butterflies. You get butterflies in there, moths, big moths, little moths.
Yeah. The birds sitting on the fence waiting to pick off the bees. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Especially the chickadees.
What, Mark?
Especially the chickadees.
Yeah.
Well, you don't want raccoons when you're feeding anyways. They love to lift up pails and drink right out of the pail.
Oh. touch wood, I'm okay about the raccoons. Haven't found my yard yet, so everything else has, but not the raccoons.
They're smart enough and have enough dexterity to actually take bricks off a pail sometimes too.
Oh wow.
I've noticed the gray squirrels in my yard. I have lots of gray squirrels all over the place, and they will go to the water. I've got one of those chicken waters for my bees, and I have big stones around the edge of it so that the bees don't fall in. And the squirrels will actually go in there if the water is getting low, and they will pull the stones out so that they can get at the water. They'll actually lift them up. They're pretty fearless and shameless, those squirrels.
Yeah. No. Yeah. It never ceases to amaze me that in the middle of the city, how far away, I don't live near the river or the park. And I know that, Veronica, you're closer to those things. What all shows up in my yard in the middle of the city?
Well, so far I haven't had problems with raccoons, although I've seen a couple of years ago, I saw raccoon paw prints on the deck one morning when there was still lots of dew on the deck. They came in the yard and they walked all over the deck, but they didn't touch the bees. So that was interesting.
Yeah, they've been a problem at the university where they actually wrecked some experiments.
Oh, wow.
Rob was looking at honeybee healthy in syrup, and the damn raccoons, they could smell the honeybee healthy, and that's the hives that they would always go into.
Really? They like that.
Yeah, they're pretty entertaining if they weren't so destructive. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a question about moths, wax moths? Have anybody experienced wax moths and how they're getting rid of them, and or what happens in your hive when you have wax moths? Like, I think I had a ball brood this year with my hive, where they uncap the brood before it comes out. I don't know, Rheal, do you know anything about wax moths?
You know what, Mark,
wax moth can be a big problem, especially earlier in the year when it's still really warm. At this time of the year, they may still be active, but they're probably not doing a lot of damage. Your best course of action now is to take that equipment and as it gets colder, make sure that equipment experiences the coldest temperatures of winter. So if you have them stored, if your equipment's stored in an insulated building, it might be worthwhile to take them out of that insulated building. Or if you can allow the rest of that stuff in that building to freeze, open up the door during the dead of winter for a little while, just so that temperature can really get into that equipment. Because depending on how many boxes you have, they can actually not freeze solid very easily. It takes them a while to do that. They got to be exposed to really, really cold temperatures. If you've only got a couple boxes, like not a lot of boxes, if you have one of those big old chest freezers, put your boxes in a garbage bag, and if it fits in your chest freezer, leave them in there for a couple of weeks, and that usually will do it. So they need minus 20 for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, there used to be a chart on a study on temperature versus time required to destroy the eggs. And I think even at minus 30, it was something along the lines of 8 days. I'm going to try to dig that up so I can publish it in the Bee Cause. Wax moths are one of those problems where situations where you may not pay attention until it starts paying attention to you. I've had to burn a couple of colonies myself because the infestation level was just unsalvageable. And not only are they damaging, but they're absolutely gross. They're like maggots on steroids. They're absolutely revolting. So I just try to, I kill them for pleasure. I know Marg and Rob had a horrible experience with wax moths as well, and it's one of those.
Sure did.
it's one of those things where you need to be vigilant on how you're storing your supers as well. If you've got them out in the open at the wrong time of year, you're just asking for it. If you see cocoons, kill them right away. If you see traces when you're doing hive inspections, and you'll see trails of webbing and feces and damage, root them out. A really well-populated and strong colony will be able to overcome a wax moth incursion. But if like nukes or old equipment, it can cost you tons of money and damage and time. So it's something you want to be pretty vigilant for.
One thing that we
Brood comb is way worse than super comb. So if you have old brood chambers, or you have dead outs and you have to store the brood chambers because you're not going to put any bees in them that year, keep a very close eye on them, because wax moth will populate those hives very, very quickly and just destroy that equipment.
Yeah. One thing that we got this year is a zapper, an insect zapper, and we've put it into above our storage of supers this year, and it was actually Nigel Dixon that got us going on that, and it works very well.
Where did you buy it, Mark?
I will make a note of trying to find out where Rob got them, and it seems to me the last time he tried again. No, was it Uncle Wiener's?
Yeah, that weird little store on Regent Avenue.
Yes.
Yeah, they do like surplus and fat. And I know Amazon, of course, is a go-to. But for some reason, PV Mart sticks in my brain. I believe they sell them there as well. They have quite a selection of farm supply there, so it's definitely worth a look on their website.
Can I just ask, what's the best way to store honey frames to avoid this?
Well, for wax moths, I'll actually take nylon screening and I'll cover the tops. But you also have to keep in mind too that mice can do as much damage as wax moths as well, especially when you're doing long-term storage. You know, as much as we can throw our extracted supers into the yard for cleanup, mice can smell, you know, a nanogram of honey in comb, and they'll go right after it. So when I am stacking supers, it's on a pallet. It's in a fairly sealed building. There is rodent traps and control and poison around. I will take metal queen excluders and I will put them on the bottom of the stacks, or aluminum screen, not nylon screen. Stack them up, make sure that there's no knot holes, because remember, a mouse can get through the hole the size of a dime. And but for wax moths, you can guard with nylon screen, but if you're doing wax and mouse, it's aluminum screen, and also back that aluminum screen up with metal queen excluders, because mice can actually chew through aluminum screening given enough time. They're if they're really desperate, they will they're really hard. They'll try to chew right through the super wall.
One year when I had an exterminator come to my house because I had mice, he said, if you can put your Bic pen in it, a mouse can go through it.
Yeah, their skulls are remarkably like malleable, and
yeah.
But if they're, and the problem with mice, of course, is not only will they destroy, they can kill, do winter kill as well, but they defecate and urinate everywhere, and there's nothing like popping open a dead out that was a mouse kill or mice that moved in afterwards. And it's just like, you know, on goes the mask and the gloves, but it's definitely preventable. It's definitely. I do see commercial beekeepers with stacks and stacks of pallets, or pallets of stacks and stacks of supers tarped over, like right in the middle of the yard. I'm not sure how many chickens and goats they're sacrificing to keep like pests away, but they must be like poisoning the entire grounds to keep their mouse control down. I know one of Waldemar's tips and tricks is when you're wintering is to make sure that underneath, if you're wintering outside, underneath your pallets, you scalp it. You make sure that if there's any grass, it's not more than a 1/4 inch, just because it keeps the nesting grounds free. And even mowing around your pallets, you've got to really, really take that into consideration. It's heartbreaking when you put in all the time and all the mite control, and you've fed them and you've gotten this colony all the way through just to get it killed by rodents is just, you know, verboten. So always keep in mind that your foes are many. You know, skunks, raccoons I've never had too much trouble with. But skunks are another one. They go to bed late, and they do like honeybees.
Thanks.
There's a question from Carrie Gunther. Is there a specific date we should be taking feed off by? That's a fairly complicated question, because generally, you know, you'll get these really warm days, and depending on how you're feeding will be depending on whether they take it or not. Keep in mind, it's not just them taking down the feed, it's what they need to do with it to dry it down. Like people feeding late, it isn't necessarily, the bees don't necessarily die just of starvation, but you've got uncured feed in the colony, like wet syrup, drives up the humidity levels, and you know, it doesn't have as much nutritional value as converted sugar or honey. So generally your feeding should be done by now. If I'm feeding, like over the last few weeks, if I've found any need to feed, I've tried to do some open feeding where the bees would have to fly to collect and grab it. I know there's some pretty strong cutoff dates where. So it's if you're still feeding now, you have to ask yourself, why are you feeding now, and why are you in the situation that you're in? And those are the hardest questions, because it means that maybe a misstep was made. And if we don't learn from that, we're going to be doing it again and again and again. Feeding should actually begin in the first week of September, or as soon as that honey flow is shut down. So keep in mind that if you're finding that your colonies are light now, on the 13th of October, your options are just become more and more limited, because we're not going to get very many nice days. Got a friend in Alberta they're forecasting a couple of inches of snow tomorrow, and that system is going to be on our doorstep on Thursday. And you know, pray to God that it's going to be turned, or it's going to mellow out, or you know, it's going to be affected or bumped out of the way. But you know, Halloween is a couple of weeks away, and there's always that snow before or after Halloween for the kids, but it's usually just before or just after. So tick-tock, and it becomes you know, feeding the time for actual feeding that's productive is kind of gone.
Can I ask a follow-up on that with pollen? When should you stop with the pollen?
How are you feeding pollen, Dave?
Just in an open bucket, like they have to go get it.
Are they taking it?
Not that I've seen lately, no.
That's generally the indicator. Either they can't, or either they don't need it, but more than likely they just can't. Keep in mind too that if they're just going to seek out that pollen, they're burning calories to do that. And they're really good at determining.
I found out some good things right now.
Efficiency.
How about feeding? Don't feed.
Like if it isn't
too late to feed. Puts too much moisture in the hive.
Like if it becomes one of those situations where collecting that pollen burns too many calories and burns too many other resources, then they won't, right? So whether or not you put a supplementary patty in the colony, that is always debatable because that can spur laying. And generally speaking, they'll use, I don't know, this, correct me if I'm wrong, Rheal or anybody, but if you put a pollen patty in your colony, they'll use it to raise brood, but they won't necessarily take it for storage. Rheal, can you expound on that?
I could add a little bit to that. Even trying to feed them pollen right now, unless they're raising brood, their likelihood to collect it and store it is really, really low. The other thing is if you're trying to feed them pollen when they're not really raising brood, there isn't a lot of advantage. In fact, there may be more disadvantage. There was some studies done a very, very long time ago where they tried to stimulate hives fairly early in the winter to see if they could get them to brood rear. And those the colony mortality in those hives was really high. And a lot of it had to do with they just burnt their time limit, like their lifespan out, as well as many of them can develop digestive problems like dysentery by trying to process pollen. So there probably isn't a lot of advantage to feeding a lot of pollen when there is no brood rearing going on.
Yeah, I think some people do it because it helps them sleep at night. If you're doing it for you and you're not doing it for your bees, the general rule of thumb is it's not a good idea. I want to touch base a little bit for wintering prep on insulation. One of the biggest questions I get is, when do I wrap? When your populations are fairly high, wrapping sooner than later isn't necessarily a huge priority because they can throw off a lot of BTUs. And it's the population that's throwing off the BTUs. It's not like they're burning a lot more honey to do so. I generally make sure that any of my wrapping is done closer to Halloween. In fact, I usually, if I'm doing a late oxalic acid treatment, I'm usually doing it on the 1st of November because that's when I know if there's any brood whatsoever, it's going to be at the absolute minimum. So you don't have to turn around and start wrapping your bees on the first week of September because we still have plenty of nice warm days ahead of time. Veronica made a nice note in chat that don't forget to close off the space underneath the bottom board, which is a cozy space for mice. I shove a tight-fitting piece of styrofoam between each hive. Colonies that I winter outdoors is I'll put on a piece of pink, the compressed styro insulation as well. But for that little space, I've been buying this well, it's not a new insulation. It's rock wool. It's actually iron slag instead of fiberglass. It's green. You can buy it at Home Depot. And the stuff is basically almost metallic cotton candy like fluff. The nice thing about that stuff is mice, although they'll nest in it, they can't chew through it. So what I've been doing is in that little space that Veronica was speaking about, I've been putting a little bit of that down there and it compresses up nice and they don't seem to like it too much. Ted Schuneman, some advice from our bygone senior. Told Veronica that you should wrap the bees following 3 nights, not days, 3 nights of -8 Celsius, which isn't a bad rule of thumb in my opinion.
If you want a simple rule of thumb, is if your nighttime temperatures are dropping below 0 consecutively, it's time to wrap your bees outside. If your daytime temperatures are dropping below 0 consecutively, it's time to move them in the building if you're planning on moving them in the building.
That's not too shabby at all. It's not too shabby at all. I want to talk to Tim Kennedy because I can see him there sometimes with his feet on
Right
the
here.
desk, and he's just been so quiet. So just wanted to make sure you're still in the land of the living. Tim, can you give us a quick little update on your winter prep and how that's coming along?
Yes. I wrap mine with the Waldemar styrofoam boxes. So for me, it's a very quick, simple, go to the hives, push two together tightly, take the top lids off so they're tight, and then just the fit form boxes on there, so it doesn't take me long to do that. However, this year I expanded a few apiary yards. So I am in the middle, in fact tomorrow, but I'm in the middle right now of making several new boxes, and I'll be wrapping possibly this week. Actually, I'll be wrapping this week, period. Forget possibly. It will be happening. And Rheal just confirmed, because I was getting a little concerned with the -3, -4, -5 type of temperatures at night coming up this week, starting, I think, tomorrow. And I thought that, boy, by the end of the week, I think I should be insulated completely. Traditionally, I like to insulate around that November 11th. However, the last 3 seasons, the temperature has dropped so drastically in October that I've been pushing. Last year, I pushed my wrapping at this time, about the 3rd week of October.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting to say that I know Waldemar's been popping in and out, and I wouldn't mind his commercial opinion. Sometimes you'll find that the feeding schedules and the wrapping schedules of commercial beekeepers will definitely change, because it's the difference between, you know, wrapping up a dozen or 20 or even 50 compared to 400 or 600 or 700, and they run more on a calendar year of exact dates, because we've got a crew available, and it doesn't matter what the weather is, they're just going to somehow make it happen. So when you're a hobbyist level or a sideliner, or you're running less than 50 colonies, you do have a little bit more of the leeway, and you've got to kind of keep that in mind, where if you're getting a rule of thumb from a larger colony count beekeeper, apiarist, to take that with a grain of salt, because there's always a translation between someone bigger or smaller than you for advice. You've got to run it through those filters. Myself, like for instance, I've got colonies that I share space indoors, and I got colonies that I do winter outdoors. I generally do as the Waldemar and Tim do, and I put them in those little pardon the expression, the polystyrene compressed coffins. I do have some bee cozies that I use, although I'm not a big fan of those, and not because of their effectiveness, but because they get damaged and they don't seem to last as long as they should, considering the cost of them. But I've seen very many different styles and wintering techniques, but the bases always have to keep to the same, where cold doesn't kill nearly as many bees as humidity. You have to have proper convection and the ability for the colony to release humidity regardless of how it's designed. I've had so many people that made the mistake of wrapping their hives up like ironclad tight, and all they do is they turn into ice cubes. So keep that. Well, Doris from in chat says as well, it's easier to keep a hive warm than to warm up a cold hive. But you've got to make sure that that moisture is out, because we all know the difference between, for instance, a hot day and a humid hot day. Well, cold works the same, right? A dry cold is doable. A wet cold is completely intolerable. So, and that ties into the humidity that is in the hive. Like, you'll get natural ice crystals forming in the hive without proper ventilation, but feeding late is another pitfall as well, because remember, the syrup that you're feeding them is at best 50-50. It's 50% moisture and honey is 18. So that's a lot of water that they have to dry down. And if they're taking in feed in late October, that's going to be just sitting in that colony. And as they eat it, they will be expelling that in their breath. So keep in mind that there are some certain practices that really have to be followed regardless of how you're wintering and regardless of how you're wrapping. As for what's better, wintering indoors or outdoors, well, I've done both, and then I've swapped back over, and then I've regretted swapping and gone back to my original plans. And I'll tell you, it's there's advantages and disadvantages to both, and it kind of strings along. For instance, right now, the advantages went this like late fall, early winter. The advantage is outdoors. The deep, dark, horrible -30 part of winter, it's more advantageous indoors. Spring, it's more advantageous outdoors. You really have to tailor it to your beekeeping program and what works best for you. Um, you can have great wintering results in either fashion, but in the end, it's all about your infrastructure and your time and how deep your pockets are as well. So I know Rheal, you winter indoors. I know Rob and Marg winter indoors. Most of the smaller beekeepers will winter outdoors. Brad, you winter indoors. However, I think I'm going to ask you to unmute Brad if you're with us. And I know that you've had experience in doing both. Have you changed over the years? And if so, why?
No, I started wintering outdoors when I started keeping bees, and that went really well. I only wintered outdoors 1 year, but I didn't lose any bees. I had only 11 colonies, but that winter went really well, completely by luck, because I had no idea what I was doing. But it worked. And my second winter, I moved indoors, but it was strictly a management decision. It had nothing to do with the bees. I worked by myself, and the prospect of wrapping 30, 50, 60, 100, 120 colonies by myself didn't appeal to me. And I had a building I could use. So I kind of reworked the building, built myself a ventilation system, etc., and moved them indoors. I had already begun using a two-way pallet system. I have a tractor to move my bees. I can have my bees in my building in 3 hours. Same thing in the spring. I can have my bees back in the bee yard in 3 hours, riding the tractor back and forth. So that appeals to me. I'm somewhat lazy, so that really appeals to me. I absolutely don't do it for the bees. I don't do it because survivability is remarkably higher, if at all. The difference in survivability is, in my opinion, negligible. It's no more than about a point, 1% difference. To me, every fall, wintering indoors sounds like a really great idea. Every spring, it sounds like a really terrible idea. Because while all you outdoor people get those warm winter days for a flight, and you get those warm Februarys for a flight, and even in March you get those flights, my bees are stuck in that barn and I'm not sleeping. All I can see is the stress and the pooping at the doorstep and all that kind of stuff. So that part of it I really hate, and that kind of leads into why I've begun insulating my boxes to help with the move out in the spring.
Cool. Waldemar, I know that you've been popping in and out, probably internet connectivity issues. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. You've been wintering outdoors for, um, have you ever wintered indoors?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so from your perspective, why do you stick with wintering outdoors? What's the biggest appeal, I guess, there?
First and foremost, I think it's way more economical. And any wintering that you're actually attempting to do, if it's indoor or outdoor, you need to tailor everything towards it. It's not only the equipment, it's also the beast that you have. You like Rheal mentioned in the beginning, Carnioleans are very in tune with the environment. And if you have Carniolan bees, they will do a lot better outside than actually Italians. The Italians will eat themselves out of house and home, where the Carniolians will come through the winter, and you have more than you need actually supplies in the spring and the hives. So that's not only one thing. I've been in wintering facilities, and honestly, I had to have actual rubber boots on. It was 2 feet of dead bees inside, and don't tell me that's a good wintering. So there is many downfalls with indoor wintering, and yeah, on top of everything else, that downfalls on wintering outside is the cold weather. But if you have the equipment that actually protects the bees, we were talking or mentioning certain dates and temperatures when to wrap, and I'd say we're trying to humanize the bees at that moment because we feel the cold, but we also have to recognize that bees are actually don't heating a hive. They're just heating the space that they sit on, the frames. So wrapping the bees too early, that's why Tad actually mentioned minus 8 degrees for 3 consecutive nights. It would be a good thing. But I wintered without wraps in Europe, and we had minus 15 and minus 20. There was just wooden boxes, and they're wintering just fine. The issue is the less insulation you have, the more moisture builds inside, the more ventilation you have to have. So yeah, it's not a 1-2 answer. It's a more complex situation.
This question has been floating around in my head ever since I met you. You're running about 400 colonies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you've got those compressed polystyrene sheaths for all of them.
Yep.
Where the heck do you store them in the summer?
Relatively simple. If you go into the country, there's a lot of old farmers and have empty buildings. And for a couple of pails of honey, you can find a building to store them.
Okay, because because you know what, I remember.
Well, no, I understand. I understand your question. It takes a room, but I'm gonna tell you how fast I wrap my apiary. 2 days.
Yeah, I can believe
2 days
that.
they're done, because all you do, you just push the boxes to the hives together, and you slip this thing on, put a couple of stones on top, and walk away.
Now, when you're storing them, you must poison like mouse proof or poison all over the place.
Well, you look for old metal grain bins. The square ones. There is no mice inside there.
Yeah, there we go.
It's not only a building. You need to know what you're looking for.
Yeah, it took me 15 years, but I got one secret out of you today. So. No, because I've been, I've picked up, I've bought nukes from you. I've done a workshop on your property, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, I can understand the volume of space that would take, and I'm like, where are you hiding these these coffins? So
well, some at some point in time, some of them do come home, and there is well, the oldest ones that I have are 25 years now, and one thing I'm gonna say, it's relatively easy to repair them too. If there's something happening to them, you can buy that bottle of foam that you use for installing these days windows, and that foam is relatively hard. So you can spray in any hole, cut it back, and rewrap it. You know,
that's really good to know.
There's another secret in 15 years.
There's you've done wintering presentations for Red River for many times. I do, and we've even got it in chat now. If we can get a picture of Waldemar's hive wrap, and I know you've many times been able to supply us the dimensions and everything else. I'm wondering if you could possibly do that in a text or an email, so we could kind of disseminate that. People take your design pretty seriously, so you've got some pretty good wintering results, and appreciate you sharing it. We are looking at 9:15. Is there anyone else with any other questions, or we're starting to? We've been
John?
on for, yes, sir.
Is Rheal still around?
Yep.
Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
A couple of things back to those queen scenarios that you shared there. Why September 1st and September 20th? I mean, that's like having a house of fire and trying to put the fire out.
Yeah, I made those because those are real life scenarios that have come across my desk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because in reality, I requeen. I tried to go with 85% of young queens into the winter in my apiary, and I select only the best ones for like the older ones to winter, and I start requeening in July, and my requeening goes through September into sometimes beginning of October, depending on what I have at the end, but majority gets requeened when the honey flow is still on. And so that gives you a completely different situation.
Yeah, I think these scenarios were more, they weren't kind of saying that this is the time you should requeen.
Yeah.
This is a scenario that if you're stuck on September 1 or early September 1 is kind of just a date, but September 5th, and you notice that you need to requeen a hive, the likelihood of finding a queen is really difficult, but if you can find them, you need to scrutinize whether it's worth the cost of that queen to try to salvage those bees.
No, I understand that part, definitely.
I agree with you. Most of my nukes that I put into winter are typically made in July.
Yep.
A couple of questions for you, Waldemar, because the fact that raising queens is your specialty. With you've got a really good wintering loss percentage. Your requeening, your 85% requeening, how much do you think impacts that? Like, how much of a benefit is that? Like when I think your wintering losses sometimes go as low as what, 2%, even less. And is requeening that often because you've got the position to do so part of that?
If we look at nature, there's very few old queens in nature. Swarming is part of a requeening situation. And as beekeepers, we hate swarming because we lose our crop, we lose our population. So we have to compensate for that. You have to look at it from a different point of view. We're looking at it as a production unit, but nature would requeen it or restart hives. You know, even swarms that go out with an older queen, after she perks up for 3 weeks, they usually after 3 weeks they try to replace her themselves. There is always a young queen in the hive. There is no such thing as a 5-year-old queen, you know.
No,
So you're asking the success rate. Absolutely, I think the success rate in wintering is very high because first and foremost, you have an unused or very little used queen that goes into the winter. And secondly, I want to mention something else. You cannot requeen in the fall time with a queen that is 3 weeks old. You have to have a mature queen that has been mated in June. Reason being is because if you have a young queen, she'll be laying for a very long time. And so the resources, the food resources will deplete very quickly. So that's another thing that you need to put on a scale.
There's a question in chat from Josh Weeb saying, Waldemar, I'm curious, what technique are you using to requeen efficiently at that volume? I guess being 400 colonies and 85%. I'm not asking you to give away trade secrets or anything, but
there's very little secrets in those things, actually. I find there's 3 ways to do it. The old-fashioned way, where you remove the queen and you wait 9 days and then you remove all the cells and then introduce the cage. That's extremely successful, but also takes a long time. I'm just looking at the time because every day that queen sits in the cage, you're losing 1,500 to 2,000 eggs. So that's the least that I would use. Usually what I do, I find a queen and dispatch her and shove the cage right into the brood chamber with the tube only filled maybe a third, and the queen gets accepted very quickly. Honey flow has to be present, because if you don't do it through the honey flow, you have to give them a little bit of food. Now, I'm gonna give another example here how to quickly requeen, and this is it sounds scary, but it works at a very high % rate too. You find the queen, you dispatch her, and you take that mated queen that you wanna replace the old queen with, and put that queen on the same spot where the old one was, because where that queen is running around, there's only nurse bees. And the honey flow is on, the field force is out, and basically they start feeding her right away. Within 24 hours, that queen will be laying. So this is 3 possibilities how to requeen. If you deviate from each one of them, you will have no success. So my preference, I call it the run-in method. Remove the old queen, and then introduce the young one on the same spot. But it has to be, a queen has to lay. You cannot take a queen that has been sitting in a cage for days. This queen has to come out of a mating box or out of a nuke that where she was actually active.
So hit the ground running, so to speak.
Yes, you need to have a queen that is producing pheromones, that smells like a mom, acts like a mom, and produces eggs.
We should do a workshop. We are looking at 9:25. I'm looking at wrapping things up. If anyone has any other questions, can I ask them to either raise their hands or quickly type them into chat, please? Oh, and of course I clicked the wrong window and I can't even see chat anymore. There we are.
Monica had a question, John.
Take over for me for a second there, Tim.
Okay. Monica, go ahead and ask the question. You'll have to unmute.
It wasn't me. Is there another Monica? There's another Monica. Maybe she had a question.
I thought your hand was waving there.
No. Oh, if it was, I'm sorry.
Okay. John, back to you.
Are you sure, Tim?
Yep.
You're kind of made for this. I'm telling you.
Hey, while we're closing down, one of the comments I wanted to make, I met with Derek Mickelson today, had coffee and a lunch, and he's going to be our next speaker for November.
Awesome.
And
you think he's here today?
Yeah, I did see his name here somewhere. Anyways, he's going to be talking on the mechanism of honeybee grooming behavior and the control of Varroa destructor. So we're going to sort of carry on a little bit on this whole queen stuff here, but specifically focusing on this grooming behavior and what that entails. So I'll be sending out, well, that's for next month. I think we're probably going to plan hopefully for November 10th. So if you want to mark that down, let everybody else know. Have Derek do a presentation, and you'll see it in our next newsletter.
Awesome. Anything else to report, Tim?
I think that's about it for now on my part.
Right. Rheal, I really appreciate all of your hard work with the presentation, and I really, really apologize for the technical stress that was floating around today. I would like to say that it's Zoom's fault, but it's actually all of mine. Red River invested in a professional account, which gives a little bit more co-hosting options, which doesn't, wouldn't have left you hanging there. So I do appreciate you adapting with us. And I have a bad learning curve, but I do have a learning curve, and I promise these meetings will be set up properly as we go along.
John, John,
mm-hmm.
You cannot go unpunished, so you're going to be president for another 7 years for that mistake.
Well, I really think I should be fired, but that being said, general call out for anyone that wants to write an article for the Bee Cause, even if it's some personal revelations or how their season went, how they tackled any problems. If you have any references or articles that you see that you want us to touch base on, please feel free to forward them. I'm a huge believer in community publications, and where newsletters are great, but the more people that are active in creating them, and that means content, the better that they are. So feel free, if you see a cartoon, an article, if you want to write something, if you want an opinion piece or a review of a piece of equipment, don't be shy. It's actually kind of fun when you kind of get into it. Other than that, we're looking at 9:30, and it's kind of time to wrap it up. Does anyone else have anything else to say? And if you do, make sure you unmute yourself. Marg, I can hear you. I can see you talking, but you didn't unmute yourself.
Right.
There we are.
Thanks for a good meeting.
Awesome. Thank you very much. They don't do too badly when we actually get warmed up. Everybody else, if you've got anything else to say, please say it now or hold your peace, but I'll call this meeting to a close otherwise. Keep safe. Really glad to see you all. Look very much forward to meeting you again in person. I really, really miss the beer and bees thing at the Legion. Regret not having more when we had the opportunity, but in the meantime, everybody keep safe. Again, big thanks to Rheal for the presentation this evening, and everyone else, take care of yourselves. Until then, hopefully we'll see you in person soon.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thanks, John. Thanks, Rheal.